like you don't need to allow the resistance to lead your actions, but instead allow what your heart will love. And if you're leaning into this change, then go for it.
Welcome back to another episode of Joy, the Journey of You podcast. We're your hosts, Devin and Chris, and we're here for joy.
This podcast is your permission slip to reconnect to your inherent joy and to embrace it.
Let's fill up the cosmic joy pot together as we dive in to today's episode.
Welcome back to another episode of Joy, the Journey of You podcast. And today I think is episode 6. Is it episode 6 already? Wow. And we are switching it up. So I ask for you to be a little patient with me as I guide you through the episode today for the first time. I'm a little excited about this. Today, we're working with a premise that to connect to joy requires change, requires us to be open to change, and realizing this and accepting that really makes it easy. Whereas when we resist change, all we can connect to really is inauthentic joy. Whereas when we just flow with it and accept it, then we can really tune into and connect to authentic joy. And that's what we're about today and what we will share with you, and hope to connect you to that. And yeah, so what we tuned into before today's episode is that spiritual bypassing, which we've talked about in the previous episodes, is really a form of resisting change and even unconsciously resisting change. And that can just make us feel better or pretend to feel better about it. And I would love to share a story about this with you, where I find that in the past, I think also because we changed countries so many times and change was such a constant part of my life, and I hated it. Really reacquainting, making new friends, tuning into and becoming aware of new cultures and being living in new places. And that really was challenging for me as a child and as a teenager. And I hated change. Plus, my German genes, like Germans, are not really known for their flexibility. So Germans are like railroad tracks and autobahns. We need a fixed structure, fixed time, and that's how we work. So for me, when I was asked to adapt to change, it was often like I pretended to be okay on the outside. I pretended like, yeah, no problem, no problem, and put on this mask. But on the inside, I was like terrified, because change is really not my optimum situation. And so what really helped me is when I had that NPO in 2015 and worked with all these cultures, from Syria, from Lebanon, from Africa, from everywhere. And they are so much more flexible than us Germans. And that really taught me how to serve flexibility in a completely different way, and to open up to change, and to be like, allow change and to be okay with it, and to see what joy it brings when we actually are able to change plans or whatever. And that was my story. What about you, Devin? Do you want to share what your
of course.
your experiences with change?
Oh my gosh, there's so many, but whenever tuning into like specific stories that would help really understand the concept and the theme of change and how much to connect to joy requires change, is I really had a really profound experience with this when I was recovering from depression after my mom was murdered. I had developed a lot of coping strategies and a lot of skills, mindfulness and meditation, and I'd been drawn into this other meditation community called the Art of art of living. And there's a breathing technique that I talk about in my book, Good Grief, that really helped me stabilize my nervous system. But what happens is when you start to do these breathing techniques and meditation, is you start to see what's coming up within yourself, right? Like you can't not face any anger or any emotions that you've been holding on to. And so before getting into this, I truly believed that I was more joyful. Like I was like, because relative to like gut-wrenching death, depression, I was like, I'm doing pretty good. I'm like, right. I think I was at this point, I had already graduated PT school. So I was at this point, we're like 5, 6 years post my mom's death. And I really did think I was in a good space. And it was my first silence course, which what you do is you go into silence, where there's no technology, you're not talking to anyone, you're not making eye contact. And this was an in-person silence course. And it was intense because you're just like
I was just
up
gonna
front
say.
with what you have been holding in. And that particular silence course, I was put up front to my anger of my mom being killed, and anger at life, and anger to the divine and powers that be and everything. And I had so much anger. And I remember I was actually peeing. I was peeing, and I was holding a lot of my anger in my kidneys. And this is where, when I talk about somatics, is like where it's like when you're really not processing something and working through it, you can really just stuff it in the body. And it was this big realization of like, holy shit, like I thought I had changed and was in a better place. And it was just this next layer. And so I really do look at it as like layers of an onion. And each layer that we come into, and each layer I've come into, has allowed me to really come into authentic living in general, but definitely authentic joy. It's, I can't fault myself for those periods of time where I was essentially spiritual bypassing, but it allowed me to like really be in a better place. So I guess what really I wanted people to hear amongst my story too is that it's like we aren't consciously choosing we aren't consciously choosing spiritual bypassing, knowing that like, oh, I'm pretending right now, right? It's it's an unconscious choice of how we like learn to survive. And so some of us, that's a strategy that we unconsciously developed, which was genius at the time. But then when we get to the next phase where we're being like invited into that change, is when it's like it's letting go of those strategies, right? And so I had to like let go of some of those strategies and be really real with where I was at the time, and seeing that like, yeah, I'm going to have to let this go. I'm going to have to change my perspective on that. I'm going to have to open up to a new way of looking at this. I mean, and I'm talking, that was back in, my gosh, 2018, 2019. Here we are in 2025. I've done that gajillion times since. But that was a really potent story where it was like really eye-opening to me of how much that spiritual bypassing was a strategy. And it was like, okay, now it's time to really look at what's going on. Um, but every time I've been um, invited into the next layer of change, is it's uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable. And so
Definitely.
that's where some of that unconscious resistance can come in. Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, and what it also brings up for me is I related it to a parking garage the other day, where it's not onion layers,
uh-huh.
but it's like a parking garage. And
Okay.
like we're on the spot 123 where we start out. And then the next time we come to the similar spot, but it's 223, and then it's 323. And it will feel like you're back to the beginning, but you're
Mm.
not, because you've leveled up, and the process will be much quicker when you're at that next level, and then at the next level, and then then it's like instant. And I love that you picked up on how spiritual bypassing is such a can be such an unconscious pattern, right?
Yeah.
And how it's good, like it really serves us for a long time, or it can serve us until we become aware of it and see, oh, look, there is another level to it. But also, it's just, I feel like it was taught for such a long time, like positive thinking, that's what you do, and that's
Yep.
how you that's how surf all the troubles of the world. Just look at just the positive. But the
Well, that's how
problem is
psychology would have us like assume to navigate. I remember one of my first two or three, but like distinctly, I had this conversation with my psychologist where it was just like positive psychology of like,
exactly, yeah.
let's like place positivity over it. And I was like, but what
Mhm.
if I don't really feel that way? And she was like,
Yeah,
you have to do it. And I was like, that just feels so inauthentic to me. Like I
yeah.
can't like,
And
it didn't
there's
work.
such a gap, exactly. Yes. And the thing is that to me, and somebody reflected that back to me back in the day when I was so full on positive, is that it comes across as toxic positivity. Is like, it's not, I was not able to hold the tension or the space for somebody to not be positive. I could not hold that, right? And because of
Yeah.
that, I had to look at the positive, because this was just not something my system could handle, right? So
Yeah.
it was obviously also a coping mechanism, but it was like, wow, realizing this, and not allowing the people to have, or not trusting that the people have the power to switch, to move through, to pass through and integrate whatever they're going through, and have that heaviness, right? But let's paint it over. Look over there, the sun is shining over there.
Yeah.
No
Well,
matter how it's raining over
it's
there.
well, it's by it, like what comes to me as you say that, it's like that's a way of like bypassing, allowing someone else to be responsible for their own change, right? And
Exactly.
that's a dynamic that we can be doing as well, is like I'm uncomfortable, so let me manage the space in the room and the energy in the room. And it's
Exactly.
if that's the dynamic that you've been playing out with people, right? I was actually talking to
Mm.
a client about this other day. It's like if your family knows you that way, and if your friends know you that way, and that's the
That's
dynamics
how
that
they
you're
expect you.
doing,
Hmm.
they expect you to act, right? When you
Hmm.
go and you are holding yourself differently and holding that the what we call the tension and just like letting things be, you're changing how you interact with people. So it's going to inevitably invite others to change. And
Hmm.
so now that just the discomfort and uncomfortableness is a little ramped up, and that's where more resistance can come in because it's
Yes.
awkward, awkward.
Yeah, and what's
Yeah.
also obvious to me about this is the system we work with, natural success. It's like you look at your current reality, where you're at now and where you want to go, and you have to take both parts into account in order to move forward. Because if you're just focused on that change, on that positive whatever,
Mhm.
there's no tension between the two, right? So you're like, ooh,
Yeah. I
right?
mean, that's the
So
more critical part of it, right? Is knowing where you're coming from so that essentially you know what needs to change. Like if you're like otherwise you're just pie in the sky idea of like cool, 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 like and
yeah,
there's no bridge, there's no stepping
yeah.
stone to it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. So where are you guys resisting change in yourself? Like if you were to ask yourself as you listen to this episode, really ponder within yourself, where am I resisting change in myself or in my life?
Or
Yeah, and just take
possibly even in others. Because, if you just look at that family situation right now, if somebody, a family member comes in and they have changed, like, are
Mm,
you resisting that, or are you allowing for that to happen? Are
yeah.
you allowing for change in yourself and others? And how flexible are you in life to rethink and re-navigate? Because I feel that is so essential right now, because things are changing so quickly. And if we're
Yeah.
just so focused on this is how it's always been, this is how it's
Mm,
always going to be and always needs to be, otherwise I feel unsafe, that's not
mm.
going to be working.
Yeah. Oh my God. What such a juicy point to share of like, because I was about to say, asking people to just tune into like, what's your relationship to change as a whole? And oh my gosh, the criticalness of our times are a changing, folks. Times are changing. There's no denying that. And so it really is an invitation to really ponder your relationship and contemplate that. Um, because as we're sharing, change is inevitable in life. And if you resist it, you're really resisting that opportunity to let that change bring in more joy and bring in more getting to know yourself at that authentic level. So, with that in mind, what is one small thing that you'd be willing to lean into changing or even opening your perspective on? And then do that.
And then just observe the change inside of you, inside of others, as you allow that change to happen, as you take those action steps,
Yeah.
because change does take action also.
Yeah.
And just see, where does the resistance come up, and also allow that resistance and acknowledge that, and see, okay, this is what's happening inside of me, and it's okay that this is happening, but I don't need to act on that.
Mm.
Like, you don't need to allow the resistance to lead your actions, but instead allow what your heart will love. And if you're leaning into this change, then go for it.
Mhm.
You have our
Yeah.
support.
Yeah. And if you need support, if you genuinely do need support in change, that's what we're here for, was that we're change makers and we help people change all the time. So if you feel that you need support, reach out to one of us directly. But if nothing else, if you're just at that stage of like that you notice that you're actually in more resistance to change in anything, it's just like sit with that for a little bit and just like really get real with yourself of what am I resisting? And so wherever you're at. So if you're ready for change, jump in both feet. If you are observing that your resistance change, look at that with both feet, right? Just stand there, look at it.
And
And
maybe
we
maybe even talk to that resistance, like have a conversation with it, like what's triggering it, what's the big fear, what's the big anxiety about, what's the worst case scenario that that resistance in you is envisioning, and how real is that, right?
yeah. Yeah, get to know it, right? Get to know yourself, all facets of yourself. It'll change you.
I
Yeah.
think that's all for today. We're looking forward to
Mhm.
seeing you again in the next episode. We have no clue what will be up, but it will
But we
drop
have it, but we
in.
have some sense of some really awesome things. Like each episode that we are coming, you can really feel the things that the energy starting to build, and we're starting to really get diving deeper into the nitty-gritty of it all,
Mm,
right? The
mm.
nitty-gritty of it all. And so until next time, folks,
Yeah.
here's to you, here's to joy.
Bye.
Bye.